The history of the world did not begin with empires. It began with roads no one remembers. Hidden paths winding through mountains, deserts, and endless seas. Roads that carried more than goods, they carried the knowledge that built civilization itself. Long before anyone carved the word trade into clay tablets, there were men and women walking silent trails, sharing ideas that would shape the destiny of humankind. Every civilization believed it was alone. Yet along invisible lines on the map, something far older was unfolding, an exchange of secrets. Not military power. Not gold. But information. Symbols. Dreams. The spark that made Sumerian priests draw the stars of heaven on wet clay was the same spark that inspired Egyptian architects to raise stone giants from the sand. Somehow, across thousands of miles, they spoke a language of patterns, numbers, and myths that no border could silence. The ancient trade routes were never just about silk or spices. They were arteries of thought. Along them flowed astronomy, mathematics, religion, and technology. When a Sumerian ship left the shores of the Persian Gulf, it did not only carry barrels of copper. It carried a way of measuring the cosmos. When a caravan from Egypt crossed the Sinai under burning skies, it brought with it not just gold dust, but architectural memory, principles of weight, shadow, and alignment whispered from one builder to another. Imagine these exchanges happening in a world without maps. No compasses, no written contracts. Only the memory of stars, the rhythm of seasons, and the trust between traders who spoke with gestures and glances. They moved not for power, but for connection. And through that movement, humanity became one network of shared intelligence. That is the true history hidden beneath the surface of mankind's earliest roads. A history written not in ink, but in the footprints of merchants returning home with more than they carried out. Now step back further. Imagine 3000 BCE. The Tigris and Euphrates shimmer under the morning sun. The first cities of Sumer are alive with noise. Markets hum. Clay tokens pass from hand to hand. And yet, even in this first cradle of commerce, something profound is happening. A priest watches the stars to calculate the flood of the rivers. A builder records those cycles on clay, using marks that will become the first form of written language. Somewhere deep within that system, one idea crosses from one shore to another, the realization that knowledge can also be traded. That thought changes everything. Trade becomes more than survival. It becomes communication. A caravan leaving your may bring lapis lazuli, grain, or linen, but it will also carry stories of gods, measurements of time, and ways to track the heavens. And when it reaches another city, Elam, Muri, or Egypt, those ideas will take root, merge, and evolve. Civilizations begin to echo one another. The pyramids rise with mathematical precision. Ziggurats mirror constellations once seen in distant skies. None of it by chance. All of it linked by the flow of ancient exchanges now forgotten by history books. The deserts keep their silence, but the clues remain. Identical symbols carved both in Mesopotamia and the Indus Valley. Celestial alignments mirrored in China and Central Asia. Even oceanic routes from Oman and Bahrain that predate known navigation by centuries. Each discovery points to the same hidden truth, that ancient trade routes were the first information networks. The roads of early globalization. Highways built not of stone, but of trust and curiosity. It is tempting to believe human progress came from war, invention, or divine revelation. But what if the true engine of civilization was contact itself? The meeting of travelers who swapped salt for silk, and in the process, exchanged the blueprints of the future. One merchant sharing a new way to weigh grain may have changed how kingdoms measured wealth. One sailor whispering the path of the stars may have altered how men conquered oceans. Every trade left behind something unseen, a fragment of knowledge, carried forward like an ember. Look closely at any artifact. The copper of Mesopotamia, the blue stone of Egypt, the seals of Harappa, they all tell the same quiet story. Humanity spent 5,000 years passing secrets hand to hand. Beneath the shimmer of gold and the glow of incense, what truly moved was understanding. It slipped through borders, crossed languages, survived collapse and war. Because ideas, once traded, could never be taken back. This is the hidden world beneath the ancient trade routes. A world where goods were merely disguises, and wisdom was the true currency. From Sumer to the Nile, from the Indus to the Yellow River, roads of sand and sea connected more than continents, they connected minds. That is how civilizations did not just survive, but learned, borrowed, and advanced together. 5,000 years ago, humanity was already global. It simply did not yet have a name for what it was doing. So tonight, we travel back into those forgotten highways to uncover how the first merchants became the first messengers. To trace the invisible roads that still shape our modern world. And to ask the question that lingers through time: what if every trade, every exchange, every handshake across ancient borders was a step toward something even greater, the creation of a single, shared human intelligence that has never stopped moving? The story of trade begins where civilization itself was born, on the shifting banks of two rivers that carved a cradle in the dust. The Tigris and the Euphrates. Here, 5,000 years ago, a people built cities so advanced they seemed to rise overnight. They called themselves the Sumerians. And without knowing it, they became the first merchants of the gods. Every dawn, the markets of Ur and Uruk woke with sound bronze chimes, the bleating of goats, the smell of barley and fresh fish. Men and women moved like currents through narrow streets, their hands heavy with tokens pressed from clay. These were the first receipts, the first contracts, the first proof that value could be measured. But what they built went far deeper. Each exchange carried something invisible, a fragment of understanding about the world, how it worked, and how man could master it. The Sumerians traded more than goods. They traded knowledge. Their language lines, carved like rivers into tablets of stone, became the blueprint of all bureaucracy, all record, all counting systems that came after. Through trade, their symbols spread. From one tablet to another city, then to another shore. A ripple of thought turned into a network of ideas, binding distant cultures long before the word civilization had meaning. Imagine standing in the ziggurat of Uruk as the sun begins its climb. A priest climbs the steps carrying offerings to the sky gods. He watches the rising light, measures its angle, notes the time of year the stars align as they did last season. Beside him stands a scribe, holding a wet tablet. He scratches those numbers into clay. This is not worship alone. It is data collection. And that data soon travels. From temple to port. From port to ship. What begins as ritual becomes information, and information begins its silent journey across the sea. Near the Persian Gulf, Sumerian boats wait to depart. They are feats of early engineering, reed boats sealed with bitumen, loaded with copper, lapis lazuli, and grain. But among the cargo lie tablets, records, and small fragments of myths. Each voyage carries a pulse of Sumer's mind, reaching Bahrain, Oman, or perhaps the coast of India. Everywhere they go, they leave traces, stories of flood and creation, cycles of stars, scales of trade. And in return, they bring back new materials and stories from cultures even older, perhaps now lost to us. Scholars once thought Sumeria was isolated, a self-contained miracle. But excavation after excavation shattered that myth. Artifacts from the Indus Valley appear in Sumer's ruins. Beads of carnelian, identical seals, ornaments in shapes never native to Mesopotamia. Meanwhile, Sumerian cylinders have been uncovered far beyond their supposed borders. Each find whispers the same truth that connectivity, not isolation, created the dawn of civilization. The Sumerian merchant was not a simple trader. He was a diplomat, an astronomer, a storyteller. On the open dunes, he looked to the horizon to navigate by the stars. On the rivers, he learned the rhythm of tides. In foreign ports, he copied symbols and traded myths for metals. His wealth was not only in material, but in knowledge collected, tested, and shared. Through him, mathematics spread like fire, concepts of weight, volume, and exchange. Even the idea of the 60-part circle, the base of modern time measurement, was born from mercantile necessity, not abstract thought. Every trade was negotiation between worlds. When the Sumerians exchanged copper for tin, they were also exchanging fragments of their worldview, how to measure, record, and predict. The technology of trade demanded alignment, weights, systems, symbols. Thus emerged one silent revolution: consistency. The world would never again be purely local. It would begin to pulse in rhythm, shared units, synchronized patterns, a memory that traveled along with ships and caravan trails. To walk through Sumer's markets was to step into the blueprint of every modern economy. Clay tokens balanced with actual goods, prices determined by season, demand, and scarcity. The concept of credit, the idea of value projected into the future, first took shape here. Yet behind every transaction lay religion. Trade was holy. The gods themselves were merchants of the cosmos, balancing light and darkness, rain and drought. The Sumerians did not divide faith and trade, they saw them as the same breath. Exchange was divine order made tangible. At night, when the markets fell silent, civilization still hummed. In temples lit by flickering oil lamps, scribes copied lists of offerings, routes, and tools. They recorded names of sailors, amounts of grain, dates of shipment. But built within those symbols was something greater, the foundation of memory. Writing was born not from literature, but from trade. To remember who owed what, who gave what, and when. And when writing arrived, history began. From this moment, the world changed. Merchants became the memory keepers of humanity. Each tally, each mark on clay, preserved a story that could outlive the teller. These marks became contracts, then codes, then scriptures. Without these early traders, there would be no historians, no astronomers, no maps, no civilization as we know it. Sumer turned commerce into continuity, the bridge through which time itself could flow. And so the currents of trade moved outward, always outward. To Elam in the east, to the Levant in the west. The boats of Sumer skimmed the coasts and returned with foreign tongues, minerals, and myths. The people of Sumer began to realize something profound: the world was wide, but connected. Each journey returned not only goods, but confirmation that knowledge could cross oceans. That ideas, once set in motion, could not be stopped. Perhaps that is why their myth spoke of water so often: the flood, the great deluge, the cosmic sea from which all things emerge. Water was their metaphor for information. It could flow, spread, and reshape worlds. The Sumerians might not have used those words, but they lived that truth. Every boat they sent out was a ripple in the tide of human progress. In their libraries of clay, among lists of cargo and prayers to Enki, lingered a deeper message. That trade was not mere survival, it was communication with the universe. When a merchant bartered under the watch of the moon, he was part of a cosmic rhythm, replaying the eternal give and take that governs every living system. To trade was to be alive, to connect, to evolve. By the time scholars later found their tablets, thousands of years had washed away the faces of the traders who carved them. Yet their marks remained, perfectly clear. They spoke of ledgers and weights, yes, but between the lines there was something else: wonder. The sense of having touched something vast, unseen, and sacred through the act of exchange. Sumer, the land between rivers, had become the heart between civilizations. And through its traders, the pulse of human knowledge began its first steady beat. The roads we trace today, the Silk Road, the maritime routes, the spice trails, all descended from that original rhythm set by the first merchants of the gods. The men and women who dared to move not only goods, but thought, across the shifting frontiers of the ancient world. The deserts of Egypt stretch endlessly under the rising sun. At first glance, it seems a world apart from the river plains of Sumer, a realm of stone, silence, and blinding light. Yet buried beneath its golden dunes lies the same pulse that once beat along the rivers of Mesopotamia. A pulse carried not by warriors or pilgrims, but by traders. The pharaohs of Egypt built monuments to eternity, but their world was sustained by movement, invisible paths that crossed beyond the Nile, threading through Sinai, Levant, and the Red Sea. Every grain of sand tells a story of exchange. Every carved relic whispers of something that came from far away. Among those whispers, one gem shines brighter than all others: lapis lazuli, the blue stone of heaven. It did not come from Egypt. It came from far beyond its borders, from the distant mountains of Badakhshan in modern Afghanistan. Nearly 4,000 kilometers away. For this stone to reach the temples of Thebes and the tombs of kings, it had to travel through the oldest network on Earth, the ancient trade routes connecting east and west before either direction had a name. Imagine the journey. The miners of Afghanistan break the sky-blue veins out of mountain rock. The stone then passes through Elam, Mesopotamia, and Levantine ports before crossing Sinai's burning desert to reach the Nile. Each traveler adds a story. Each stop adds a price. By the time it touches Egyptian hands, it is no longer just a gem. It is proof of connection. A message that says, you are not alone. There are others beyond the horizon, who know the same gods, who look at the same stars. In temples along the Nile, priests crushed lapis lazuli into fine powder for paint to color the eyes of statues, to mark the skin of queens, to adorn the coffin masks of the dead. The pigment shimmered like frozen sky. For Egyptians, this color was divine. It represented life beyond death, the boundary between earth and cosmos. Yet what made it sacred might not have been only its beauty. It was its journey, the unimaginable distance it traveled. To hold a stone from a land unseen was to hold a fragment of the universe. And that alone was magic. The trade that brought lapis lazuli westward carried more than color. It brought ideas. The traders who crossed the deserts between Sumer and Egypt were not merely couriers of gems, they were couriers of memory. Through them came symbols, measures, myths, and calculations. When Sumerian cylinder seals began to appear in Egyptian graves, they told a silent story of cultural fusion. Temples began to align with stars long tracked by Mesopotamian sky watchers. Concepts of sacred geometry and cosmic proportion began to take root beside the Nile. The early dynasties of Egypt built their identity around divine kingship, the idea that the ruler was the bridge between gods and men. This, too, mirrored ideas that traveled. In Sumer, the king was chosen by the gods and served as steward of divine order, a belief almost identical in shape, though spoken in another language. Trade routes did not only carry goods, they carried frameworks of thought. The foundations of theology, mathematics, and governance moved with the same caravans that carried gold and incense. Civilization was not invented in isolation. It was exchanged, refined, and reimagined at every meeting point. Now picture the caravan routes that linked these worlds. Across Sinai, men led camels laden with resin, spices, salt, and stone. Along oases, there were markets that never appeared on maps. Traders gathered by torchlight, sharing water and stories. In the silence between dunes, symbols were traded more powerfully than goods, gestures that signaled peace, measurements made by stars, marks carved on clay tablets that became shared codes of trust. Those invisible understandings were the true map of the ancient world. The Egyptians learned to trade with two worlds at once: the inner world of the Nile, where life followed the river's pulse, and the outer world of deserts and seas, where strangers appeared bearing gifts from horizons unknown. This duality shaped their thinking. Their gods ruled both order and chaos, life and death, the known and the unseen. Every transaction mirrored the divine balance: giving and receiving, wealth and sacrifice, knowledge and mystery. Even their architecture may hold echoes of that exchange. The Great Pyramids were not isolated miracles but the culmination of generations of knowledge drawn from wide horizons. Behind their angles lies geometry shared across cultures, ratios found in ziggurats, alignment techniques seen in Sumerian observatories, and astronomical precision that hints at correspondence between priestly astronomers across lands. The great stones of Giza might have been carved by Egyptian hands, but the mathematics guiding them bore fingerprints from many worlds. As the centuries passed, new materials joined the caravan lines: copper from Sinai, cedar from Lebanon, gold from Nubia, incense from Arabia. With each material came new myths, new gods blended into Egypt's pantheon. The goddess Atha, protector of foreign lands and the desert road, rose to prominence. She became the spiritual guardian of trade, symbolizing not only abundance but also connection, the unseen bridge between faraway peoples. Under her gaze, commerce became communion. At night, when traders camped between dunes, they used stars to find their way. The same constellations charted by Sumerian priests now guided men through Egyptian sands. Somewhere in that shared sky, civilization learned a truth that would never fade: that the world was one fabric, woven by movement. The stars themselves became the currency of trust. Each traveler carried them, each returned home by their light. By the peak of the Old Kingdom, Egypt stood radiant, its temples gilded, its tombs filled with treasures. But beneath that splendor flowed invisible rivers of exchange, the lifelines of thought that stretched across continents. When archaeologists later opened the tombs, they found goods from as far as Afghanistan, Mesopotamia, and Nubia, evidence of a network far older and more intricate than any empire. Its borders were not political but intellectual. It was the borderless world of trade. Yet somewhere in those relics, a deeper message endures. Civilization did not evolve through conquest, but through curiosity. The Egyptians, masters of permanence, built their eternity from the impermanent, from movement, from contact, from exchange. The lapis that colored the eyes of the gods carried within it the memory of mountains and sailors, miners as merchants, deserts and dreams. To trace the root of that single blue stone is to trace humanity's early desire to connect, to seek beauty in distance, to find meaning in exchange. The gem that once lay under Afghan sky became the heartbeat of Egyptian sanctuaries, uniting two worlds that never saw each other's faces. In its shimmer you can still glimpse the first vision of global thought, the birth of what we now call civilization. So as the moon rises over the pyramids, imagine them not as final monuments, but as milestones along an ancient highway built on trade, bound by secrets, illuminated by knowledge that traveled thousands of miles before finding a home in stone. This is how Egypt learned to speak to the cosmos, and how the cosmos spoke back, through the language of exchange that had begun long before the first pharaoh ever wore his crown. Far to the east of Sumer and Egypt, another civilization rose along the banks of a different river, wide, brown, and ancient as time itself. The Indus. Here, among winding waterways and fertile plains, cities appeared with astonishing precision. Streets laid in straight lines. Houses built with uniform bricks. Sewers, reservoirs, and granaries constructed with mathematical order. This was the world of Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro, cities that seemed to emerge not from chaos, but from calculation. The Indus civilization remains one of the great enigmas of history. No kings carved their names in stone. No wars were sung in their memory. Even their language is silent, written symbols pressed into small seals that no one alive can yet read. But their silence hides strength. They were engineers, planners, and traders who built not for war, but for harmony. And through their ports, the pulse of ancient trade flowed further than ever before. Long before the Silk Road, the Indus routes reached deep into the heart of the ancient world. From these river cities, merchants sailed down to the Arabian Sea, steering their ships toward Oman, Bahrain, and the distant coasts of Mesopotamia. Archaeologists have found Indus seals in the ruins of yore, and Sumerian beads in the sands of Gujarat. Their signatures outlasted their names. Each artifact tells a story of movement, a whisper across the ages that says, "We were here, and we knew the world." Picture the harbor of Lothal, one of the oldest known dockyards on Earth. Its stone walls curve gently around what was once open water, designed to control the tides. Merchants walk beneath the morning haze, loading cargo of cotton, beads, copper, and ivory into boats of wood and bitumen. They sail not into the unknown, but into a network already alive, a network spun by the human desire to connect. Across every route flows not only goods, but memory, measurement, tradition. The people of the Indus traded like mathematicians. Their city layouts followed geometric harmony. Their weight small cubical stones found in markets and homes were standardized across thousands of kilometers. That standardization was their genius. It turned the act of trade into a universal language. A merchant from the Indus could meet one from Sumer and find balance literally and symbolically. On the scales between them, they discovered order. And perhaps something more moved in that balance. Perhaps knowledge itself passed silently alongside their goods, techniques of brick-making, irrigation, metallurgy, and crop rotation. When Sumerians built temples with perfect altars, when Egyptians aligned pyramids to the stars, maybe they were not acting alone. Somewhere in the flow of exchange, fragments of shared understanding connected these worlds, though they would never meet face to face. The Indus civilization had no pyramids, no colossal monuments. Yet its cities were monuments to precision. The people seemed to believe perfection existed not in height, but in harmony. Their streets aligned with cardinal directions, their drainage ran with the slope of the land, their wells descended directly beneath homes. It was as if every brick knew its place in a cosmic geometry. That sense of balance echoed the same principle found in trade: give and receive, measure and equalize. At dusk, as the markets emptied, the weight stones gleamed in the fading light. Somewhere, an accountant scratched marks on wet clay. In those small marks lay the heartbeat of civilization, organization. That same heartbeat pulsed in Sumerian markets, in Egyptian temples, and would one day echo in Chinese silk workshops. The Indus people understood what bound humanity together: systems. Without them, trade collapses. With them, the world begins to synchronize. Sailing merchants from the Indus carried their ideas as naturally as wind carries seeds. They left traces of their craft wherever they traveled: in Oman's copper mines, in the pottery of Dilmun, in the coastal settlements of Makran. The symbols found on Indus seals, animals, signs, repetitive marks appear again and again, far from their homeland. Some scholars believe these marks may have represented trading guilds, merchant families, or divine protections for their journeys. Even if their meanings remain locked, their presence alone speaks of communication that stretched beyond mountains and seas. And so, the Indus became the quiet center of a world in motion. Their civilization stood at the crossroads between West and East, a channel through which knowledge, goods, and myths traveled both ways. When Sumerian merchants returned home with cotton textiles, they brought with them a concept only the Indus could have taught: the art of weaving, yet unknown to Mesopotamia. When Egyptian traders received beads of agate or jasper from far across the desert, they held not just ornament, but evidence of a global conversation written in trade. It is no coincidence that as this network expanded, patterns of worship began to overlap. The fertility figures of the Indus, with wide hips and serene expressions, resembled echoes of later goddesses in Mesopotamia and Egypt. The sacred animals of Harappa, bull, unicorn, serpent, reappeared across other civilizations as symbols of power and mystery. Ideas traveled disguised as icons. Trade became the first medium of mythology, the way gods themselves migrated between cultures. Yet, unlike empires that rose by conquest, the Indus world thrived without walls. Their diplomacy was made of trust, not weapons. Their routes were open, their exchanges equal. For nearly 1,000 years, peace was their legacy, a peace woven through commerce, not control. It is perhaps the purest dream of civilization, prosperity without domination. But even the greatest harmony must face change. Around 1900 BCE, the rivers began to shift. Floods came and vanished unpredictably. The climate turned harsher. Caravans slowed. Harbors silted up. The songs of traders fell silent. The Indus cities emptied, leaving behind perfect bricks, clean streets, and unreadable tablets, a civilization that vanished not in fire, but in silence. And yet, even in disappearance, their influence endured. The systems they created, standardized weights, balanced trade, shared scales, became the foundation for every exchange that followed. The merchants of the Indus were the mathematicians of the ancient world. They taught that stability could be built from fairness, that prosperity could arise from equality. They proved that a world connected by trade could last longer than any kingdom built on power. Today, when we speak of civilization, we speak their language without knowing it. The idea that markets must be fair, that records must be true, that exchange depends on trust, all of it began here, between the rivers of the Indus. The silence of their vanished script hides not mystery but message. The message that humanity's progress depends on its ability to measure, share, and believe in mutual value. So when the wind moves through the dry ruins of Mohenjo-Daro, it is more than mere sound. It is a whisper across 5,000 years, the echo of merchants who once understood the shape of harmony and built a world upon it. A world that connected continents long before maps, kings, or empires. Their roads may have turned to dust, but the balance they discovered still defines us. The ancient agreement between giver and receiver, weight and worth, still governs every heartbeat of civilization today. Push past deserts and river plains, and you reach the edge of the ancient world where earth surrenders to the sea, and horizon vanishes in the shimmer of sun and salt. Here, trade takes on a new shape. No longer bound to the land, merchants become sailors, navigators of uncertainty. The waves carry their ambitions farther than any caravan ever could. This is the dawn of maritime exploration, and at its heart lies a place both legendary and real, Dilmun. Dilmun, today known as Bahrain, sits in the blue-green waters of the Persian Gulf. To the Sumerians, it was paradise, a land of abundance, where the boats of copper and carnelian docked under the watchful gaze of gods. But Dilmun was more than a port. It was a pivot, a hinge swinging open the door to distant kingdoms. From here, the first sailors looked beyond the gulf and dreamed of open ocean, mapping routes no foot had ever traced. Imagine the shoreline, crowded with vessels of every design. Reed boats laced with pitch. Plank ships from Oman's mountain forests. Crews of men with sunburned skin and eyes fixed always on the water. Here, cargo mattered, but not as much as courage. Each voyage was a wager against monsoon winds, shifting sandbars, uncharted islands. With every departure, knowledge was gained and shared, the art of stitching hulls, reading currents, finding direction by the stars. Sailors spoke in low voices of islands where the trees dripped pearl and the beaches glinted with strange stones. They believed the ocean itself was alive with tempers, tides, secrets. But never did they see the sea as a barrier. It was a bridge. Every crossing knit the world tighter, shrinking distances, binding strangers into neighbors. The ocean became a new road, deep and restless, but open to those brave enough to listen. From Dilmun, maritime trade blossomed. Sumerian copper journeyed to Gujarat, ivory left the Indus for Arabia. Bitumen, shells, lapis lazuli, scent-laden resins all traveled the ocean's blue arteries. And with each crossing came not just goods, but ideas. Shipwrights learned from one another, adapting hull shapes and sail rigs borrowed from foreign ports. The urge to cross boundaries began to shape new tools, the plank keel, the stitched hull, the mast that could catch a shifting breeze. Yet, perhaps the greatest cargo was invisible, a knowledge of the sky. Without compasses, without charts, sailors watched the heavens. They tracked the North Star rising above the water, memorized the changing patterns of wind and wave. The positions of the moon and sun became milestones along invisible routes. These were skills not taught in any city, but handed down from sailor to sailor, learned through failure, and shared with reverence. What began as practical necessity soon became a tradition. Navigational secrets were rarely written, but spoken and enacted, performance given new weight with every successful landfall. Some say the earliest maps were not drawings at all, but remembered songs, patterns of stars recited at dusk, the rhythm of oarstrokes echoing the tides, the same lullabies sung from Dilmun to India, from Arabia to the valley of the Indus. As journeys grew longer, trust deepened between the world's first sailors. Ports sprouted along the coastlines: Magan, Maluha, Sapara, Makran, each a mix of warehouse, market, and sanctuary. Here, traders could barter for water, repair a sail, or buy protection from local gods. Each port was both destination and beginning, a place where languages blended, customs mingled, and every new alliance sent ripples through the far corners of the world. Sometimes, port towns grew into mysterious powers of their own. Dilmun's priests became keepers of treaties, mediators in disputes between Sumer and the kingdoms to the east. They controlled not armies, but the ebb and flow of traffic, gatekeepers of the resources every great civilization hungered for. Control the harbor, control the future. This was a politics of connection, silent and subtle, enforced not by sword but by the rumor of closed docks. Evidence of these ocean journeys has lasted millennia, far outliving the empires their cargo enriched. Sumerian clay cylinders have been found in Gujarat. Indus seals have washed up in Oman. Shipwrecks off the coast of Arabia hold beads whose color matches only the riverbeds near Mohenjo-Daro. Everywhere, the pattern is clear: the sea connected what the desert could not. It carried myths as easily as minerals, prayers as freely as pearls. Maritime trade also transformed identity. The children of sailors grew up between languages. At home, they prayed to Enki, god of water. In port, they learned to bow low to the spirits of wind, to honor the ancestors of distant shores. Sailors became translators of customs, of knowledge, of vision. They returned home with tattoos, beads, and tales that bent the imagination. The first cosmopolitan world was born not in palaces, but on decks slick with salt and risk. At night, as small boats rocked quietly in Dilmun's harbors, men gathered by flickering lamps. They traded stories with as much care as they traded copper or cloth. Techniques for tracking whales, tales of storms survived, warnings of hidden reefs and welcoming villages. A conversation centuries in the making, its rhythm broken by laughter, its silences filled with wonder. Information passed mouth to mouth, sometimes as myth, sometimes as crucial survival knowledge. Boundaries blurred. Each man held a map not on paper, but in memory. Looking back, it becomes clear, the ancient maritime routes did more than move goods. They remade the mind of the world. People learned to think wider, to imagine lands beyond their own horizon. In the blue mirror of the Gulf, the first global imagination began to spark. Soon, those sparks would ignite across all seas north, east, and west as well. Other cultures watched and learned. Egyptians expanded ports on the Red Sea, studying trade from Dilmun and beyond. The people of the Levant carved new harbors, seeking entry to the club of sailors. Even distant cultures felt the pull. The shape of ships buried in Scandinavia would centuries later echo the lines invented by Sumerian and Indus hands. The sea had become a world without walls, a place where every encounter shifted destiny. And so, the legacy of Dilmun and its sailor traders survived every flood and conquest. After 5,000 years, the stones of its harbors still watch over the tides. The story of the first open ocean journeys of risk, reward, and the patient gathering of knowledge still whispers in every map, every chart, every hope placed upon uncertain water. This was more than commerce. It was civilization in motion, dream carried by wind and tide, each voyage another stitch in the fabric that joined humanity into one world. Before the Silk Road became a name, before maps drew a single line across the heart of Asia, threads of silk were already moving quietly through the world. Carried not by armies or kings, but by traders walking ancient trails. They did not call it silk. To them, it was simply light made tangible, a fabric that shimmered like sun on water, soft as wind, strong as destiny. And through those luminous threads, empires would one day be bound together. The story begins in ancient China, deep within the valleys of the Yellow River, where myth says a goddess discovered the secret. Legend tells of Lady Lezu, the wife of the Yellow Emperor, watching a cocoon fall into her teacup. As she lifted it from the hot liquid, it unraveled into a thread so fine, so endless, it could only have come from the heavens. Whether true or not, what followed was a miracle of design. The Chinese learned to raise silkworms, to spin their cocoons into fibers, to dye and weave them into cloth that captured light and movement in equal measure. But silk's beauty made it dangerous. For centuries, its method of creation was guarded as a divine secret punishable by death if shared. Still, no wall can contain human curiosity forever. Traders, envoys, and nomads began to carry scraps, hints, and whispers along their paths. A single ribbon of silk could draw marvel anywhere it appeared. In Egypt, fragments dating back to over 1000 BCE have been found wrapped around royal mummies. In Mesopotamia, kings received silk as tribute long before the first caravans of the known Silk Road took form. The secret had already begun to travel. Imagine a small caravan cresting the hills of Central Asia, its camels loaded with spices, wool, and bronze. Hidden among them, a bundle of silk, smooth, almost weightless, yet worth its weight in gold. When merchants reached distant cities, they did not just sell it, they displayed it under the light of fire like treasure from another world. Nobles watched it ripple between their fingers and saw more than fabric. They saw mystery, a symbol of connection, evidence of a civilization beyond their reach, and proof that beauty itself could be traded. Through these early exchanges, ideas moved hand in hand with fabric. Chinese astronomers shared star patterns, Western merchants brought tales of worlds lit by strange constellations. Silk became a bridge of thought as much as of luxury. From one loom to another, from one court to another, a slow, invisible revolution began, the creation of aesthetic diplomacy. Every roll of silk that changed hands carried also a story, a technique, a worldview. There is something natural about this flow. Silk, after all, is born from metamorphosis, the transformation of a worm into a being of flight. And so, too, did civilizations transform through contact. The Egyptians learned new dyeing arts, the Assyrians adopted Chinese weaving patterns long before they met a Chinese weaver. Even language shifted, words for silk and China appearing in tongues thousands of miles away. Each mirrored thread carried a bit of shared identity. Yet in those days, the roads that carried silk were not single paths but living webs. Along the Himalayas ran trails barely wide enough for one man. Across deserts, secret oases provided rare water to caravans. In Persia, traders stored silk beside carved ivory and indigo spices in deep stone halls. Each resting place was a thread in the greater tapestry of human ambition. Geography divided the world, but trade refused to obey those lines. In time, the knowledge of silk weaving began to slip west, slowly, like a shifting tide. Some say it traveled through nomads of Central Asia, others through merchants of Bactria, where Greek and Eastern cultures met under desert skies. Wherever it went, it changed people's sense of beauty, status, and power. To wear silk became to declare oneself part of the world, to adorn the body with the handiwork of unseen hands in unseen lands. But to the people who made it, silk was never just luxury. It was meditation, patience made visible. Each thread took thousands of hours, thousands of touchpoints between human and nature. The silkworm spun for survival, but humans turned its labor into art. That art became economy. And through economy, it became destiny. Silk wove humanity together, farmer to weaver, trader to ruler, builder to priest. The merchants who carried silk also carried risk. Storms, ambushes, disease, yet still they moved. Not out of greed, but a quiet devotion to discovery. They were the veins through which the lifeblood of culture flowed. And at night, resting by campfires beneath an indifferent sky, they would unravel their bundles, letting the silver cloth glow softly in the firelight, as if the moon itself had descended into their hands. In that glow, you could see their faith, that beauty was worth the danger, that knowledge must move to survive. When we look back now, the phrase Silk Road feels like a single path. But in truth, it was a labyrinth of human connection that existed long before the name, long before Rome or Han. And though the roads would later grow wider, their spirit was already alive, the idea that trade was the lifeline of civilization. Where rivers end, trade begins. Where languages divide, silk unites. The first threads carried not only color and softness, but meaning, the conviction that no culture exists alone. By the time empires rose on the backs of these roots, the true revolution had already occurred. The sharing of silk had taught humanity something profound, that luxury depends on cooperation, that beauty seeks connection, and that across deserts and seas, we are drawn together by wonder more than need. The ancient silk that wrapped pharaohs, graced Sumerian halls, and shimmered in Persian sun was more than fabric. It was proof that the human spirit, like silk itself, was designed to connect, to stretch across landscapes, to bind what distance divides. Even when nations fell and roads crumbled to dust, the threads remained, carried in memory, in myth, in art. To trace silk is to trace mankind's first global conversation, one spoken in touch, color, and faith. A language woven through time, soft enough to survive every empire that rose and fell upon its path. The Silk Road did not begin with maps or kings. It began with a single thread, carried by a human hand, shimmering in sunlight, whispering the same message still echoing 5,000 years later, that the world is one fabric, and every thread matters. History remembers the Bronze Age for its weapons, its tools, and the birth of cities. But beneath that gleam of metal lies a deeper story, one of connection. Bronze was never found in a single place. You needed copper from one world and tin from another, fused together by heat and human imagination. Every blade, every bell, every ornament was proof of a network stretching across continents. The Bronze Age did not just create empires, it created communication. In the 3rd millennium BCE, bronze became the first truly global technology. It unified distant lands through necessity. In Anatolia and Cyprus, miners pulled copper from mountains rich and red as blood. In Afghanistan and Central Asia, men dug deep into the earth for the rare veins of tin that completed the alloy. Between them lay deserts, seas, and mountain passes, but trade overcame them all. Caravans loaded with heavy ingots crawled over long distances, linking settlements that had never before met. Each route became a line of transmission, not only of goods but of knowledge, the secret of metallurgy spreading silently from workshop to kingdom. In Mesopotamia, artisans learned to balance the ratio of tin to copper, perfecting weapons strong enough to shift the course of war. In Egypt, smiths forged chisels that carved stone harder, faster, deeper than ever before. And in the Indus, bronze was turned to peaceful purpose: mirrors, ornaments, precision tools for city builders. Across the world, a single discovery took on 1,000 different forms, shaped by culture, intention, and belief. Imagine the sound of a Bronze Age workshop. The crackle of charcoal, the rhythm of hammer on anvil, the glow of molten light spilling from clay furnaces. There is something alchemical about it, men taming fire to transform earth into something enduring. Yet these places were not only for labor, they were laboratories of human progress. Metallurgists were both artisans and magicians, their knowledge a guarded treasure passed down through generations. But no secret stays contained forever. Through trade, through contact, the formula moved. Bronze became the first technology too valuable to keep, too required to control. It was military power, agricultural strength, religious symbol, and royal wealth all in one. Kings rose and fell by who possessed it. Ports were fought over not for land, but for access to tin. The paths of metal shaped the paths of empire. A forgotten map of the ancient world could be drawn not by borders or rivers, but by the movement of bronze. In the Aegean, the Minoans built their shining palaces with bronze saws and chisels sharper than obsidian. In Mesopotamia, bronze sickles reaped the harvest that fed cities of mythic scale. In distant China, ritual vessels of bronze began to appear, massive, decorated with symbols of the heavens, announcing a people who had mastered both metallurgy and meaning. These simultaneous blooms were no coincidence. They were signs of an interconnected world in motion, a global workshop humming across thousands of miles. But power born from shared knowledge soon feeds competition. As bronze tools turned to swords, the networks that delivered tin became networks of domination. Whoever controlled the sources controlled destiny. Empires looked east and west not for conquest alone, but for resources. Armies guarded caravan trails as fiercely as cities. Trade routes once filled with partnerships slowly hardened into strategic corridors, arteries of empires that beat in rhythm with the furnace. Still, not all exchanges were bound by war. Many were bound by awe. When sailors from Dilmun brought bronze trinkets to the Indus ports, local artisans examined them in silence, learning texture and tempering through observation. When tin from Turkmenistan crossed into Mesopotamia, smiths repaid the gift with new kill techniques. The world of bronze was an economy of experiments, every trade sparking invention. And wherever metal traveled, so did myth. Across cultures, gods of fire and forge emerged: Enki in Sumer, Ptah in Egypt, Hephaestus in Greece, Agni in India. Separated by continents, these deities mirrored each other, creators of tools, bringers of light, mediators between human and divine. The worship of craftsmen was the first global religion, a shared reverence for creation through transformation. Consider what this means, that metallurgy, the practical art of melting stone, somehow inspired theology. That from the act of forging came the idea of rebirth, base matter purified by fire, made whole by will. To the ancients, the furnace was a portal between worlds. Each casting was a small miracle. And through thousands of small miracles, civilization advanced. The Bronze Age connected more than economies, it connected philosophies. Measurements became standardized, weights adjusted for distant traders, scales calibrated in shared units so bronze could be fairly exchanged. A universal logic began to emerge, one that valued precision over force. The spirit of cooperation, though often broken by greed, survived in the very symbols scratched onto ingots, merchant marks, signatures, guarantees of trust. Perhaps the most stunning legacy of this network lies beneath the sea. Off the coast of Turkey, the Uluburun shipwreck still sleeps, a merchant vessel from 1300 BCE carrying cargo from every corner of the known world. 10 tons of copper, a ton of tin, glass from Egypt, ivory from Africa, amber from the north. One ship, one story, one floating testimony that the ancient world was never truly separate. Civilization was already global before anyone named it. And yet, as with all great advances, the same fire that created progress also sowed collapse. The hunger for tin pushed trade routes into perilous lands. Drought, war, and scarcity shattered the delicate balance. Around 1200 BCE, the Bronze Age world began to unravel. Networks broke. Cities fell. The secret of alloyed metal dimmed for generations. Iron would soon take its place, but the memory of bronze remained, the first time humanity learned that progress requires partnership. When we handle bronze today, we hold more than ancient metal. We hold connection itself, the proof that survival depends on collaboration, even between rivals. Every polished artifact, every surviving statue, is a snapshot of human unity forged in flame. The Bronze Age was not merely an era of weapons or wealth. It was a network of thought made tangible, a time when the understanding of one craftsman might travel 1,000 miles, shaping the destiny of kings he would never meet. So when light strikes an ancient blade in a museum and it gleams with that unmistakable warmth, copper's red heart, tin's soft silver, remember what it truly reflects. It is not the glow of power, but the shine of shared brilliance. A reminder that long before writing or empire, humanity's greatest invention was not metal, but connection. Across the endless sands of Arabia stretched a silence so vast it could swallow sound itself. But within that silence moved life, slow, steady, and purposeful. Caravans. Long lines of camels draped in fabric, carrying the breath of civilizations in jars, linens, and gems. The desert might have seemed empty, but it pulsed with secrets. Beneath its stillness, human connection found a new form, trade written across sand, guided by stars, protected by faith. These were the secret caravans, networks invisible to the world beyond. They moved through heat and mirage, linking the kingdoms of the Red Sea, Egypt, Mesopotamia, and beyond. For centuries, this land was thought uninhabitable. Yet it became a bridge between continents, a conduit for wealth, and the cradle of countless whispered exchanges. Here, on the dunes, the map of the ancient world redrew itself not by rivers or seas, but by the trails of traders who risked everything for the cargo they carried. Their treasure was not gold, but aroma. Frankincense and myrrh, resin drawn from desert trees, fragrant when burned, sacred in temple and tomb alike. To the Egyptians, these were gifts for the gods. To the Sumerians, they were keys to ritual. To the traders, they were life itself. Loads of incense would travel hundreds of leagues, exchanged for copper, silk, grain, or wine. And everywhere those precious trees grew, life bloomed around them. Villages sprang up beside the trade paths, oases became markets, and markets became cities. The Nabateans, masters of the Middle Eastern desert, perfected this art of movement. They built Petra, a city carved into rose stone, hidden in cliffs and canyons. To outsiders, it was myth. To those who walked the sands, it was sanctuary. Petra flourished not by conquest, but by control of flow, guarding the convergence points of caravan trails that brought incense from southern Arabia to Syria, Rome, and the Mediterranean world. Imagine those caravans setting out from the coast of Oman or Yemen. Hundreds of camels loaded with resin, hides, and spices. Bells chiming softly, their rhythm blending with the whispering wind. Traders wrapped in linen study the horizon, waiting for dawn's first light, the only compass they need. Each march is a negotiation with the desert, the sun, and time itself. They travel not by landmarks but by memory, marking the positions of stars, dunes, and stories passed from one generation to the next. By day, heat shimmers like liquid. The air bends, the horizon trembles. By night, the world opens. The desert sky becomes an ocean of constellations. Every route, every destination, traced by celestial logic. This knowledge is traded as carefully as any material. To know the stars is to survive. To survive is to profit. And so, astronomy became not a science of curiosity, but a tool of economy. The same stars studied in Babylon and Sumer now guided camel caravans through Arabia's endless dark. But even here, in barren lands, the spirit of exchange thrived. Travelers built not only trade routes but networks of trust, wells dug and guarded, landmarks shared, contracts sealed with words and faith alone. In an empire of sand, memory was law, honesty the only currency. Betrayal brought exile, loyalty meant legacy. Many caravans were family lineages, known by scent and symbol, their incense marked with unique resin blends, their roots protected like hereditary maps. Every encounter on the road was sacred. A stop at an oasis could mean survival. There, strangers from Persia, Egypt, and India gathered to rest under the same date palms. Languages mixed in murmured trade. Coins and scales gleamed in the lamplight. Somewhere between negotiation and prayer, cultures intermingled. A word for peace would change shape but not meaning. A proverb, a melody, a recipe shared, small human gifts traded beyond the value of any good. The desert's greatest irony was that its isolation made it universal. Because it belonged to no single kingdom, it belonged to all. The caravans became bridges between worldviews. They carried not only incense but invention, the mathematics of weights, the architecture of arches, the geometry of navigation. Each stop along the route gathered fragments of knowledge and spread them further, like grains of sand scattered by a restless wind. Yet, secrecy remained. The locations of certain wells, the timing of particular crossings, the names of safe passes, all guarded with mythic caution. Traders spoke of gates of shadows, hidden valleys where the wind never slept, ravines where voices could vanish in seconds. The desert demanded humility and rewarded mystery. And perhaps that is why so much of the trade never made it into written history. It survived instead as oral code passed in quiet, guarded songs that only true travelers could understand. Petra, their shining heart, was both puzzle and masterpiece. From its gateways carved into crimson cliffs to its winding canyons wide enough for only a loaded camel, everything about it was designed for protection and wonder. The Nabateans carved channels through stone to capture and store every drop of rainwater. In a land of drought, water was wealth. And it was this mastery of engineering, secrecy, and trust that made them the unrivaled keepers of the desert's commerce. Visitors who entered Petra marveled at its silence. No fortresses, no garrisons, no war machines, only trade, carved in architecture. Its temples glimmered with influences from Greece, Egypt, and Mesopotamia. Every column told of contact. Every carving was a map of migration. And though the desert surrounded it with emptiness, Petra itself radiated abundance, a testimony to the power of connection amid isolation. When you think of the secret caravans now, imagine them as veins of the earth, pulsing life through barren veins. With every journey, they carried world views, connecting civilizations that had never seen each other's faces. Arabia, once thought cursed by remoteness, became the crossroads of everything holy, gold from Egypt, pearls from Dilmun, silk from China, ivory from Africa. The sands that burned by day became the backbone of human exchange by night. Then, as centuries passed, the great trade winds shifted. Rome fell, empires fractured, ports changed hands. The incense routes faded into legend. But wind still moves across the dunes, revealing traces of the old roads in patterns of ripple and stone. If you listen, you can almost hear the bells of camels and the soft hum of men reciting prayers before another crossing. The sound of faith and trade, inseparable, eternal. The secret caravans of the desert taught the world a truth as old as dust: connection does not always need conquest, and silence can carry more meaning than thunder. In a landscape that seemed lifeless, humanity built its most enduring proof of cooperation. The caravans are gone, but their rhythm never stopped. It beats quietly still in every market call, in every scent that lingers in the air, in every exchange born not of greed, but of trust. Every network must face its shadow. Every road, no matter how mighty, must someday fall silent. The ancient roots that once wrapped the world together from the Indus to the Nile, from Dilmun to the farthest mountains of China, did not last forever. They lived, they thrived, and then they dimmed. It happened slowly, then all at once. Like constellations fading at dawn, the lights of the ancient trade world began to vanish one by one. The Bronze Age collapsed first. Empires shattered. Cities once wealthy from trade burned or emptied. Droughts swept through fertile lands. Tin and copper roots broke, leaving furnaces cold and silent. Without metal, armies weakened. Without armies, protection vanished. The caravan stopped moving. The merchants scattered. Entire civilizations retreated behind their own walls. The pulse of connection faltered, and for a time, humanity forgot how connected it had once been. But memory never disappears. Beneath the ashes of fallen cities lay the traces of maps, stories of merchants, fragments of silk, beads, and tablets that spoke of exchange. Even in collapse, trade refused to die. It lingered like an ember buried in dust, waiting for another breath of wind. That wind came from the east. By the first millennium BCE, new kingdoms began to rise: Persia, Greece, India, China. Each stood on the bones of those who came before and looked outward again. Curiosity, commerce, and conquest pushed their borders back toward one another. Slowly, almost unconsciously, humanity began to rebuild the web it had lost. Old trails were rediscovered, old harbors reopened, old languages reinterpreted. The world of trade was being reborn. This renaissance came in stages, first by land, then by sea. In the vastness of Central Asia, Persians built royal highways that connected the Mediterranean to the mountains of the east. Couriers could carry messages faster than ever. Beyond those mountains, Chinese dynasties strengthened villages, roads, and ports, unknowingly preparing for something immense. And when the two worlds finally brushed against each other through border traders and emissaries, the spark reignited. That spark became what history would one day name the Silk Roads. Not a single road, but a living system: rivers of sand and stone, of wind and will, connecting kingdoms that could barely imagine each other. From Xi'an to Anj, from Samarkand to Tyre, goods began to move again. Silk, of course, led the way. But behind it came jade, glass, incense, and ideas, always ideas. The ancient dream of civilization had remembered itself. Humanity was once again in motion. Imagine that rediscovery. After centuries of isolation, a group of Central Asian traders meets an envoy from Persia. Each wears clothes stitched with patterns neither has ever seen. Their languages clash, but trade does not need translation. A piece of silk is shown, a gem exchanged, a smile shared. They understand each other instantly. The grammar of commerce is universal. The old machine hums again, smooth, unstoppable. The rebirth of these routes did more than connect wealth, it connected wisdom. Buddhist monks carried scriptures across deserts. Chinese craftsmen learned glassmaking from the West, while Greek artisans studied Eastern dyes and astronomy. In Bactria and Parthia, cities bloomed like crossroads of thought, blending philosophies and technologies in new forms the world had never seen. The Silk Roads became universities of dirt and sky, where caravanserais replaced classrooms and travelers replaced teachers. Even music moved. Instruments crossed borders. The flute of the Middle East became the ancestor of the Chinese xiao, the Indian drum found echoes in distant Africa. Each culture borrowed what it loved and made it its own, weaving a global rhythm long before nations had names. But like all living things, these roads carried both light and shadow. With wealth came desire. With connection came conflict. Armies followed merchants. Empires claimed control over stretches of road and sea. Persia fought Greece, Rome absorbed Syria, China clashed with nomads on its frontier. The Silk Roads, though born of exchange, became battlefields of ambition. And yet, even in war, trade persisted. Where swords clashed by day, caravans still crept through valleys by night. The road survived not because of kings, but because of people, the traders, sailors, translators, and dreamers who saw connection as worth any risk. Their resilience was the true miracle. In the midst of plagues, invasions, and collapse, they kept moving. They were the heirs of Sumer, of Egypt, of the Indus and Arabia, the living memory of all who had come before. By the 1st century CE, the rebirth was complete. The Silk Road stretched from the Pacific to the Mediterranean like veins of life, carrying goods, religions, and stories. In Rome, senators wore Chinese silk, unaware it had passed through 100 hands. In India, gold coins were stamped with Greek gods. In China, glass from Phoenicia glittered in imperial halls. The world had become a single conversation again, whispered across languages but understood by all. And yet, true to the rhythm of history, nothing stayed constant. Power shifted. Dynasties fell. The Mongols would one day unite the steppes, reviving the roads once more under their banners. Centuries later, the sea routes would rise to dominance, pushing the overland Silk Roads into quiet memory. Each rebirth carried the memory of the last, each collapse sowed the seeds of renewal. The roads themselves were alive, dying and returning like the breath of the earth. The story of their fall and rebirth is not just about trade, it is about time. When societies collapse, the instinct to connect always returns. The need to share, to move, to exchange ideas, that is what survives calamity. It is civilization's heartbeat, one that never truly stops. So, when you look at the Silk Roads on a map, see more than routes. See reincarnation of thought, of trust, of curiosity. See the echo of Mesopotamian caravans, Egyptian ships, Indus ports, Arabian incense trails. See how the web of humanity refuses to break no matter how many times it burns. The roads have been forgotten and rediscovered again and again. Yet, beneath every modern highway, every shipping lane, every digital network, lies their ancient spirit. The Silk Roads never died, they simply changed form. Their rebirth continues in every connection we build today. In the hush before dawn, when first light spills across the mountains of Asia, the air still vibrates with memory, the distant hum of traders, the creak of wheels, the murmur of languages long gone. The Silk Roads live on in that quiet rhythm, an endless cycle of fall and return, a reminder that even when history fractures, the world will always find its way back to itself. In the end, every road leads back to its beginning. The story of ancient trade routes is not merely a chronicle of goods and distances. It is the story of us, our need to connect, to understand, to share what cannot be contained. 5,000 years ago, our ancestors walked, sailed, and rode these paths to survive. But in the process, they did something greater. They taught the world how to think together. The eternal exchange. That is what endures after the maps and kingdoms fade. The exchange of knowledge, of symbols, of trust. Long before we invented writing or coins, the true currency was understanding a word, a gesture, a piece of advice whispered between strangers at the edge of the known world. Every civilization that rose from the dust did so because someone dared to trade not just what they had, but what they knew. When you trace the lines of these ancient roads, you are not looking at geography. You are looking at memory. Sumer-s clay tablets, Egypt-s hieroglyphs, India-s seals, China-s silk, Arabia-s incense, each was a voice in a conversation that never stopped. Their words may be buried in sand, but their meaning still hums beneath our world today. Every network we build, every market, every port, every digital signal crossing an ocean is a shadow of that first exchange. Think of it this way: humanity is a single marketplace of ideas. Empires may rise and fall, languages may divide us, but the need to share always finds a path. When old roads disappear, new ones form. The Silk Roads became sea lanes. The sea lanes became cable lines. The camel trails turned into air routes, and now into invisible webs of data carrying information faster than any caravan ever dreamed. Yet the essence is unchanged. We are still trading secrets, not of incense or bronze, but of knowledge and vision. Look at the modern world through this lens and the pattern is unmistakable. Trade is not just movement of wealth, it is movement of thought. The scientists of one continent rely on the discoveries of another. Music, art, belief, and science migrate across borders, transforming as they move. What began on foot now travels at the speed of light, but it is powered by the same impulse, the same ancient instinct that led a Sumerian to cross a river, an Egyptian to sail a sea, an Indus merchant to brave the monsoon. The will to reach out. Perhaps that is the secret woven through all 5,000 years, that connection itself is sacred. The ancients built temples for gods of fertility and fire, but in their trades and travels, they performed a greater act of worship. They sustained life through cooperation. When they bartered salt for silk, when they shared maps of stars, they were building something immortal, a network of trust that transcended time. Even collapse could not break it. When empires fell, traders remained. When kings vanished, stories endured. Knowledge has always been the most stubborn traveler. It hides in languages, survives in art, disguises itself in myth, until someone rediscovers it and sets it moving again. That is why these ancient roads never truly died. They sank beneath the surface, waiting for new travelers to awaken them. If you listen close enough, you can still feel their rhythm in today's world. The soft humming of cargo ships echoes the creak of ancient caravans. Airport lights flicker like the fires that once lit the harbors of Dilmun. Even the architecture of modern cities, bridges, tunnels, corridors mirrors those first attempts to conquer distance and forge unity. Every connection hums with ancient resonance. Every exchange repeats the first agreement humanity ever made, to share rather than to stay silent. In that sharing, civilizations found their immortality. For what survives is never the palace, nor the war, nor even the monument. What survives is the idea passed from one mind to another, carried by the roads, protected by the traders, remembered by time. The measure of an era is not how much it amassed, but how much it gave away. That is the legacy of those forgotten merchants, the wanderers who turned isolation into alliance and distance into destiny. As the centuries turned, each generation rediscovered this truth in its own way. The Greeks in their academies, the Arabs in their libraries, the Chinese in their maps and silks, the Europeans in their voyages across unknown seas, all were heirs of the same impulse. To explore. to understand. To bring light to places unseen and return home changed. Every discovery, every invention, every shared idea is a thread in the same eternal fabric woven from the first moment two strangers decided to trust each other. Standing now in the modern age, we are still walking those roads though we may not see them beneath the glass and concrete. They exist in our connections, in every exchange that crosses boundaries of language, belief, and border. We have become the merchants of the intangible, trading in data, emotion, and creativity instead of copper, lapis, and gold. But beneath it all, the same purpose remains, to weave understanding across the spaces that separate us. The world may look different from above, cities glowing, satellites orbiting, lines of code flowing faster than wind, yet if you strip away the technology, the heart remains ancient. It is the same heartbeat that pulsed in Sumerian trade halls, in Egyptian harbors, in the silent dunes of Arabia. It beats quietly inside us still, reminding us that civilization is not built by borders, but by bridges. Perhaps that is the final secret these roads have whispered across the millennia: connection is the closest thing to eternity humanity will ever know. Not immortality of flesh, but of purpose to pass something meaningful onward. The traders of old handed the torch through trade, we hand it through stories, science, and shared dreams. Each road is a memory of that endless handoff, stretching unbroken from the past into the future. So, as the story ends, imagine the image from where it began, the earth seen from above, its dark surface webbed with faint lines of light. Those lines are not highways or flight paths. They are the same ancient roots reborn again and again. The veins of a living world, still pulsing with the same desire that once carried incense through deserts, silk over mountains, bronze across seas. Humanity, forever exchanging, forever learning, forever reaching for the next horizon. This is the legacy of 5,000 years, the understanding that nothing truly belongs to one people, one time, or one place. Everything we have ever built, language, art, technology, civilization itself, is the result of trade. Not simple barter, but the exchange of imagination. And that exchange, eternal and unbroken, remains the greatest secret humanity has ever shared.